Hello, and welcome to the Mission Report with Chris Dush. Recently, both the PIAA and the NCAA confirmed that they are now following President Trump's executive order to ban transgender male athletes from competing in women's sports. This makes today's guest on the Mission Report even more timely and relevant. Former University of Pennsylvania swimmer Paula Scanlan never intended to rock the boat. She attended a prestigious university, competed at the Division I level, and landed a job in corporate finance. All that changed when she decided to speak up against biological men in women's sports. As a sexual assault survivor, Paula was not content to allow Leah Thomas, a former Division I men's swimmer, to invade women's locker rooms and take women's trophies. Despite the pressure to stay silent, she now uses her platform as a national spokeswoman for the Independent Women's Forum to speak the truth. Welcome, Paula. It's an honor to have you on today's Mission Report.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Paula, my experience in the fight against human trafficking has led me to discover that it's the firsthand stories that people have lived that are most effective in pushing back against the lies. Statistics and stories related by politicians, they don't have the impact of hearing directly and frankly from survivors. What I'd like to start out with is your journey, and if you're comfortable with it, starting with how you were a sexual assault survivor from high school on in through your competitive swimming and onto the national stage as a spokeswoman, and on the importance of standing up for truth, free speech, and the fairness in women's sports.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate your attention to this issue. I mean, there have been a lot of politicians, not on the other side of the aisle, that have been very quick to shut down this conversation, invalidate. In fact, I was actually just testifying in Arizona, and I shared my experience having been assaulted, and a Democrat on that was there called me disgusting for sharing that experience, and used those words. So it has been definitely a really interesting journey to watch the group of people that have been so rah-rah for the Me Too movement and believe all women, but when they have a woman that's talking about something they don't like that doesn't match their political agenda, they're very quick to call me names, shut it down, and pretend like it's not happening. So I just wanted to say that I appreciate you for being a lawmaker that is not in that boat, and I'm greatly appreciative of it. So, I mean, just getting into it, like any athlete that makes it to the Division I level in college, I mean, you've dedicated hours and hours and hours per week by the time you get to college to whatever it is your chosen sport is. And for myself, I started swimming competitively at age 8 is when I formally joined a swim team. And I just continued to work hard towards it. And in high school, I started to realize at the beginning of high school that if I continued to work hard, it was actually a possibility to swim Division I, which was, a great dream come true. And so all of these different aspects of my life, I mean, so many parts of my entire life growing up really revolved around swimming. And so, of course, I did not expect to ever be in a situation where there would be a man on my team, but we can get into that. But when I was a sophomore in high school, I was assaulted, and it was really, really a challenging experience, obviously, for anyone going through that. But what I will say is swimming was something that was really grounding for me to have during that time. I knew I could go to practice at the same time every day. I knew that I had teammates that I could see regularly. It gave me routine. It helped me really get through the situation, and swimming really was the only thing that I felt like I had that was stable at that time in my life. And so to think about robbing young girls of that opportunity to stabilize their lives, to help teach them skills, to even help you do better in school. Swimming taught me a lot of time management, is exactly why I wanted to fight so hard for this, because I thought about myself at 16 years old when I was going through this, and I said, if one 16-year-old girl is robbed of this opportunity, I mean, who's to say what might happen? And that is really what motivated me. And also, in particularly, a story I want to share is a story of Peyton McNabb. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but Peyton was in high school and she was knocked unconscious by a male volleyball player on the opposing team. And it was really stories like Peyton's that said, okay, we are allowing young girls to be permanently injured. Yes, Peyton was permanently injured from this injury. We're allowing young girls like Peyton to be permanently injured and no longer able to play sports because we are standing by and allowing this. And so it was really those stories of Peyton and thinking about the young girls who were losing out that really motivated me to talk about this. And again, I think in a way, of course, it was unjust for what we went through in college, but it's more about these young girls. And when I started hearing more and more stories of these young girls being affected by this issue, that's really when I woke up. And what I asked myself, I mean, this was over a couple of weeks and months of reflection, but I said, do you want to be part of the problem or part of the solution? And staying quiet when you know this is wrong and you're seeing young girls get injured, that means you're part of the problem. And so really when I realized all of that, that was when I knew I couldn't stay quiet any longer. So that's really how I got to talking about this issue, to advocating for this issue, to just being part of the national conversation on this whole entire issue. But we can also talk about the individual details of what I experienced being at the University of Pennsylvania and on the swim team with this man who was there with us the entire season that we were competing.
How did that experience start with I know I've listened to the story, but when the university gave you that first announcement, those 2 meetings, and can you go into detail on that?
Yes, so we first found out that Thomas was going to be competing on our team actually back in 2019, it's been a long time coming actually. And essentially what happened, and I remember this vividly, it was the beginning of September, so I was a sophomore in college at this point, and our coach said there was a mandatory team meeting for the men, they were going to do their meeting, and then we were going to do our meeting. The men finished their meeting, they leave, and I noticed a member of the men's team was waiting back, and I was like, interesting, I wonder why he's still here. It's just this is supposed to be a women's team meeting now. And our coach goes to start the meeting, and he looks at this male athlete who at the time was William Thomas, that was his name, and said to him, Will, this is your meeting. And Will just looks at us and says, hey guys, I just want to let you guys know I'm transgender. I'll be transitioning to your team next season. Please refer to me now with she, her pronouns. And at this point, I didn't know how to react. My first instinct was to laugh. And people, when I tell people this, they don't believe me, but it was just so crazy to hear. It was just so unheard of. It was just something I never even imagined I would have to process in my brain at 19 years old at the time. And I didn't even know, I was like choking back laughter, and I was sitting towards the front of the room, and I look behind me, and the girls on my team are clapping, and they're saying, we're so proud of you. Congratulations on coming out and being your authentic self. And honestly, at this point, I didn't even know how to process it. So I go home, our coach just said, okay, great guys, everyone get in the pool, practice starts now. That was it. There was no questions, there was no further conversation, and practice as usual. And at this point, I look up the policies, I go on the NCAA website, and I find that they say that all you have to do is declare that you're a woman, and 1 year later, you can be on any women's sports team in any sport across NCAA athletics, whether it be swimming, track and field, softball, you name it. And I said, okay, surely this is not correct. This cannot happen. And somebody is going to step up and do the right thing. And it became this slow moving train wreck. We lost the season because of COVID. So the Ivy League had no sports in 2020 to 2021. And then 2 years later, in the fall of 2021, now he has a locker just like everyone else. He's on the women's roster, and like they didn't even have any further announcement or meeting at the very beginning of the season. He was just on the women's team, and everybody was just pretending like it was completely normal. He was just another girl on the team, no questions asked. And so that's really how we got into the situation. Yeah.
Yeah, and that locker that you talked about, that was in the women's locker room, right?
Exactly. Yes. And I remember when we were doing the locker charts, the assistant coach was doing the charts, and I remember this is before practices had begun, so it was in August at this point, and I went into our coach's office to talk to them about something, and I looked at this chart, and I saw that he had a locker in the women's locker room, and at this point, we actually weren't even sure if he was going to be undressing in our locker room or not. They had told us they would find ways to be accommodating. It was a concern that people had raised early on back in 2019. And it was just, he had a locker just like everyone else's. He was on the chart. I remember looking down at this piece of paper, seeing exactly where his locker was. And I went to my assistant coach, who was still filling in the names. And I said, I would really love to be in this back corner because I've never gotten to be there before, and it's my senior year. And I remember strategically trying to place myself as far away as possible from him.
I understand, especially given that you're a survivor of sexual assault. I mean, that had to have been very uncomfortable. And how, I know he was, they were talking about putting him into like a unisex bathroom at one point, or for doing the changing, but you had a classmate or a teammate who was literally stuck right next to him. And
Yeah, it's funny you bring her up. I was on the phone with her last night for 2 hours. We were just catching up. And so actually we of course discussed this stuff because how could we not? Because it's still relevant many years later. But yes, so my teammate, she the same thing. She shows up for the first day and her locker is right next to Thomas's. And she goes to our coach and she says, "This is a joke, right?" And they're like, "Sorry, he's on the team. You have no choice." And so there's this single stall family bathroom in the hallway outside of our locker room. And originally back in 2019, when this conversation first started, we were told that he was going to be changing in that locker room. That's what we were sort of early on discussing. And so a lot of people were under the impression that that would be happening. And so what's so ironic about all of this is that that same teammate would walk out every day into the hallway and use that locker or that bathroom he was going to be using because she didn't want to undress next to him. So that paints the picture perfectly of this entire situation, that the burden to make this situation more comfortable for ourselves or fix the situation in any way was on us. It was not on the university. It was not on Thomas. We were the problem. And if we had an issue, it was up to us to find a solution and fix it. And that, to me, really paints the picture so clearly of that, again, the burden to do anything in this situation was on us, the female athletes, not on anyone else.
the administration, from the university president on down to the coaches, that's a betrayal of the trust that's being placed in them in having in protecting the women that are involved with sports. For that teammate of yours, I was in swimming for many years myself, and I know that can you describe what she had, kind of how she had to suffer, because those women's suits, you ladies need to be able to help one another. Do you want to describe a little bit of how that kind of put her out?
Yeah, I mean, for all of us, I mean, we're all still in the locker room. I just was
Right.
lucky that, so the best way to explain it for our visual listeners here is our locker room was shaped like an L. And so Thomas was at one end of the L and I was at the other. So there was a little bit of that kind of corner situation going on that you kind of hide behind. That's luckily where my locker was. But yeah, racing suits take 20 minutes, 30 minutes to get on. I mean, they're really tight, and truly, I am not even exaggerating. Women's racing suits are about this big and you get it on from your shoulder down to your knees. And I'm not exaggerating. People think we're being dramatic. I'm not being dramatic. It is quite literally that small. And these, special material, if you move it a certain way wrong, you can rip it. If your nails are too long, you can rip a hole in it. I mean, they're constantly ripping if you're putting it on the wrong way. I can't tell you how many times I've had a suit rip, even during a competition. I remember this one time I was getting on the blocks, my suit rips as I'm about to dive off. I mean, you name it. It's a challenging, thing to put on. So, and also not even just racing suits. When you're going into practice suits, swimming is a sport where obviously you need to be completely in the nude to get out of your suit. I mean, we're not expecting anyone to walk home in 30-degree weather, right? Because our season is during the winter. In a wet bathing suit. And other sports, soccer, track and field, lacrosse, I mean, you don't necessarily require to be fully undressed in your locker room. I mean, of course, there are people who will shower and whatever, but it's not a requirement. I mean, quite literally in swimming, you do have to be completely exposed. And so it really, in a way, is the worst sport to put girls like this through. And again, not to discount any of the other female athletes in other sports that have had to deal with, men in their locker rooms and men on their sports teams. But really, swimming is a sport you were so exposed and for so many different times and for so many hours each week. I mean, we have 9 practices a week. It was 18 times we had to undress with him because you change into your suit before practice and you change out after. That's 18 times we were getting completely undressed in front of this fully intact male. And I think a lot of people don't really realize, again, how many times, how often, how frequently And it's disturbing, and especially disturbing to hear this happening in high schools, and girls even younger than that. I mean, it's just, I think even my own parents didn't even fully realize and wrap their brains around how disturbing it really was, because I mean, I'm sure if my dad had realized, he would have come down there and solved the problem. That's what Riley says too about her. I mean, it's it's just so unheard of. You just never even think of that.
Well, let me tell you something. If I had tried to do that when I was at Clarion, my dad would have come and solved the problem.
I mean, truly,
Apparently,
and that's what I say to a lot of people about this entire conversation, is that how we got into this whole predicament is that people are afraid to tell somebody no. Why did nobody at any point say, "Hey, William Thomas, no. I know that you might think that you're a woman. I know that you might like to grow your hair out or whatever it is that you might want to do. But why is it that nobody ever said no?" And that is really what's happened, and I see it a lot with like parenting in our generation, for people my age, right? Is it's just they're just, oh, we need to be nice and accommodating. No is an answer too. Like, you can tell them no. And that's, again, that's really how, I think we got into this, is that they couldn't say no to people who are mentally ill for.
well, and you and I are both are people of faith, and when the Bible teaches us that we have to correct the child. It's the responsibility of the parents to correct the child. Apparently, Will Thomas never experienced that. And unfortunately, he didn't experience it with the university or the NCAA, which that's a betrayal. Again, I go back to when you're in a position of responsibility, you must be willing to take on the hard decisions. Otherwise, don't take on the role. So, with your personal experience prior to coming in, what did it feel like? What can you talk about the betrayal and what you were feeling emotionally as being a survivor, and then being thrown into a situation that I know to a young person like you or anybody who's survived this, it would just be totally irrational not to think that you would have some strong feelings about that as a survivor.
Yeah, so I mean, what's so interesting is, honestly, I almost didn't really process how bad it truly was until I was removed from the situation. So something else a lot of people don't realize, right, is we lost an entire season of swimming because of COVID. And so in
Yes.
a weird way, when we show back up in the fall of 2021, it's almost like we're so accommodating to be back. It's like, wow, we even get to be back in the pool. And they're like masking us up. They're like, you have to wear the mask until you get into the pool, and then you put your mask on the side of the pool and your mask gets wet and you're being waterboarded. And I'm not even exaggerating. I mean, there's all these different, Leah Thomas aside, there's all this different COVID nonsense. I mean, you're masked in class. They're making you get these tests bi-weekly. I mean, it's this whole thing. And so a lot of that going on in the background, we're just excited that we get to see a swimming pool and compete in it. I mean, it truly. And so that is sort of the mindset a lot of us were in going back into this season. It was just, I'm grateful to be here. And so in a way, I was like, okay, I'm incredibly uncomfortable in this locker room. I knew that every single time I stepped foot in the locker room, I heard his male voice, I was uncomfortable. I mean, the biggest way I can explain it to you is, you're sitting in your locker, you're not listening or talking to anyone, and you hear people chattering in the background, and I would hear this male voice, and I would jump a little bit. And I would say, oh my gosh, somebody got into this locker room that's not supposed to be here. And then I would have to jump myself back to reality and retrain my instincts and say, no, actually, this person is invited and welcomed in this locker room by my university, by the NCAA, by my coaches. And I would jump myself back to that reality. And so I would keep trying to retrain my instincts, which is the most dangerous part. And I know you work with, again, sex trafficking, and that's what I hear from a lot of women saying, that that's why this is so dangerous, is we're teaching young girls to reprogram their brains to essentially welcome predators and put them into dangerous situations. And so that was what I was doing with myself all season. I would feel uncomfortable, but I'd have to keep retraining myself and say, no, 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 he's supposed to be here. The university wants him here. I can't do anything about it. And that was what would happen, again, very early on this season. But for me, as the season went on, I started to have nightmares during the season. I would have these horrible nightmares about people coming into our locker room assaulting us, or even Thomas doing things that, or even worse than what was happening in the locker room, right? Different variations of the locker room, bathrooms, campus, assault, all of those different types of things. I would have like weird dreams where my experience at 16 would kind of be looped in to campus and all of the, I mean, I can't even really explain to you. It actually started every week. It was multiple times a week. It was especially on the nights before we'd have morning practices because we wake up at, 4:50 in the morning for morning practices 3 times a week. It'd be especially on those nights. I'd wake up in sweat sometimes, like in a pool of sweat, and then I have to get up and go to the pool. And I wasn't really sure what to make of that. And again, I didn't really process really how messed up that was until I was removed from the situation. And yeah, and so that's what I was dealing with during the season. And again, I just told myself I wanted to get through it. Again, it was my senior year. This was the last shot I would ever have to swim in my life. And interestingly, after the season ended, I did not go back to the locker room to clean out my locker after our last meet.
Oh,
I
wow.
refused to step foot in the locker room. And I remember this so clearly. I had already graduated, okay, diploma in hand, cap and gown returned, all of the things. And I was cleaning out my apartment in Philadelphia. And I said to my mom, she was helping me, I said, "Oh my gosh, Mom, I forgot to clean out my locker." And so I went back to the pool after everyone had graduated. There was no kids on campus, and that's when I went and cleaned out my locker. And that was that was actually, I had not been to the pool since our last practice before our last meet. Before that, there was like a half-eaten granola bar that I was eating during that practice that had mold on it. I'm not even exaggerating because I just had no interest in going back.
Oh, in talking with sex trafficking survivors and other victims, what you just described, that not realizing the trauma that while you're going through it, that's not uncommon. It's in fact, it's prevalent. And the fact that you and everybody that was on your team had to suffer through that and are probably still processing that. Some of your teammates that kind of went along with things, one of the things with the Diagnostic and Service Manual up through DSM-4, we recognize that when people are delusional, you don't go along with their delusion because even in their minds, they know that they've got something going on. And if you try and go or to agree with it, a lot of times from working a special needs unit in the prison, if you tried to play along with the guy that was delusional, boy, you'd get it. But my point is this: nobody did Will Thomas any favors by going along with his delusion but trying to force everybody else on your team to succumb to that delusion. And for me, also working with the sexual predators and stuff, this is called grooming. This is where a process that the people who are trying to groom future victims, they engage in this kind of stuff. And it's disturbing that the universities and, even legislators, others are going along with this. I think it's very important that you're bringing out this aspect of things, that the not truly understanding whenever you're going through it, especially at a young age. You talked about the high school kids. I'm sure there are some very promising young ladies who would have possibly been Olympians that when they were told in high school that you're going to have a boy in your locker room, either the parents pulled her off the team or she just felt uncomfortable with that. I know you were at the signing, am I correct, with
Yes.
President Trump?
Yep.
Those young ladies that you were there with, you want to describe how they felt, and the parents that I know that were there, can you describe what the feeling was with them?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really amazing day. I mean, I was there alongside, I mean, obviously Riley Gaines, who I'm sure everyone listening is familiar with, and she's a wonderful close friend of mine. She was obviously there. Peyton McNabb, who I mentioned earlier, was there. I mean, there was this girl, Lauren, who's a good friend of mine. She's a professional golfer who lost a spot to a male individual pretending to be a woman and trying to play women's golf. There was Macy Petty, who was a volleyball player in high school who had to compete against boys when she was working to get a scholarship to go to college. I mean, so many wonderful women that I've met along this journey, all of which spoke up at pretty young ages for this, right? At the oldest, 22 years old, but at the youngest, I mean, Macy was speaking out when she was, newly 18. Peyton spoke out as a 17-year-old. I mean, there were these young girls. There were also mothers who had worked on this issue who had just been concerned for their daughters' safety in sports or at school, who were there. And so those were a lot of the young girls who were photographed, weren't necessarily personally experienced, didn't personally experience this, but their moms worked very, very hard to fight for this issue and to raise awareness and to talk about it in school boards and to bring it up on the national stage and to do media. And so it was really just a great group of people, right? So all different levels. It was like mothers that had fought, it was female athletes themselves, young girls who just didn't want to compete against boys once they got older and started playing more competitive sports. So it was really this wide age range. And everyone there was, I mean, wonderful, loving people. Again, we all came together and worked hard, so many different backgrounds, many different states represented. I mean, right, like I'm from the Northeast. I went to college in Pennsylvania. Riley's from the South. I mean, you name it. It was just all over the country. But to me, what was so interesting is that I do feel a little bit bad that we even have to waste President Trump's time to sign something like this. And I feel like that has to be said.
Yes.
It is a waste of time. And it's not a waste of time in the sense we should not be doing this. We should be doing this. But the fact that we have allowed leftists in this country to go so far that we have to step in and say, let's get the sitting president of the United States to sign an executive order to say men do not belong in women's sports. I mean, it really shows how far hostage we've been held by the left and some of these radicals and some of the crazy people you probably deal with working in legislation. I mean, I don't know on the state side if it gets as crazy, but some of these people we have in the federal government on the Democrat side, I mean, when they brought this bill to Congress, 2 Democrats went on the record and said, yeah, I don't think men belong in women's sports. 2, and over 200 others believe that they should. I mean, it's really crazy that this became partisan, that this became controversial. And so, yes, to summarize, yes, absolutely, a wonderful day of celebration, a great win for women. I'm grateful to President Trump for his attention to this issue and, again, doing this so quickly within his busy presidency. But the fact that we're here just shows how far this country has fallen a little bit and how far
Oh my.
crazy radicals are willing to go to do something that makes no sense to probably 80% of Americans.
I got a bunch of very young farm kids. I'm in a very rural part of Pennsylvania, and I got 11 and 12-year-olds that can tell you the difference between a cow and a bull.
Everyone can, and that's the thing is everybody can, and I'm just grateful for sanity coming back in this country, and I do feel that I've seen a lot of that in the last couple of weeks since January 20th. So I'm excited, but I mean, there's still a lot of people that are unhappy that are, sending us hate mail and all of the things. So
Well, there's still a lot to be done. I mean, you know that this isn't the end of things. I know Margot Kaczorowski, she and some others have got a lawsuit against the NCAA and some others to get the records corrected
yep.
because Will Thomas is not a woman. He doesn't deserve to own the women's records. And the same goes in all these other sports. What are some of the things that you see ahead as far as the challenges?
Yeah, so obviously executive order is a great first step. I mean, I think ultimately though, what we need Congress to pass this. And I urge the Senate to bring this. And I think that there is a little bit of hesitation because they need 60 votes to pass this. And obviously we don't have 60 Republicans, and it seems like Democrats don't want to vote for this. And so, but I will say, I hope that they bring it. And even if it does not end up passing, it's not a waste of time because you will get these senators on record saying that they believe men belong in women's sports. I think that that is very valuable information to have. I think we can then use it against, them, run people against them, convince other Democrats to, even if it's a, more left-leaning state, run against them and say, convince them that this issue is not the hill to die on. And it's absolutely not, because again, polling shows at least 80% of Americans
Yes,
agree with us on this. How many issues do
absolutely.
80% of Americans agree on ever, right? How many issues can we even say 80% of Americans agree on? So this is a winning issue. If you're on the other side, this is a losing issue, and it's not even partisan. This is a losing issue, period. And so it's just, I want them to bring in, I think that's ultimately what we need, because who's to say in 4 years we don't have somebody else come into power. I hope it doesn't happen, but and repeal this and change the rules on an executive order. And then the other thing is, I do think, yeah, we do have to win in the courts. I do think that honestly, the Supreme Court does need to hear a case about this and have a ruling favorable to us, because I think that also will help set precedent and to litigate these things, to have these lawsuits, to be able to sue for records and damages and the NCAA and all these other corrupt institutions that have allowed this. And so I think that's really what's next. And then also state legislation, which I know that's something you work on, and that is absolutely important, because we can't have California say, yeah, anything goes, let's have 6'4" tall men in the ladies' room, but you have states like Tennessee, which was one of the first states actually to pass legislation that says, a man is a man, a woman is a woman. Also, men can't play women's sports, where, things are very different. So that's something we're all looking to continue to work on. Again, some state legislation, and then those two other branches of government on the federal level as well.
Well, I'm hoping that if Margot was a teammate of yours, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. She and others that with this lawsuit, they're not seeking money, and they're just seeking the NCAA, University of Pennsylvania, the Ivy League, and others to just correct the record and do what's right. And that's that's the stand that we all need to take. It's got to be do what's right for the purpose, just because it's what's right.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, I think, I wish the NCAA had stepped up sooner. I think that's really what this comes down to. And they've showed us that they're cowards. And honestly, taking this long, they're now hiding behind the executive order to finally change their rules. They had an opportunity to do this over 3 years ago now,
Yeah.
when this was happening, and they chose not to. So I will say I am glad that they are doing it. Better late than never, but they are still cowards for taking this long. And as someone who went through it and they didn't change the rules when we were going through it, it is disappointing to see again how long it's taken them to really come to reality and say, yeah, this is actually a terrible idea.
Yeah, it was about a year and a half ago that Riley was up at Penn State, and of course, the protesters were there, and they were trying to drown her out. But before that even happened, there were two people that were trying to stir up a physical altercation, while there were three kind of off to the side with the larger group that were waiting for it to happen. They were trying to instigate something. Unfortunately, everybody that was there in support of Riley was very, we're just trying to have a decent discussion. The two instigators went down and turned over the tables, but I went up, the Penn State police were standing there, but they had a bunch of liberal professors standing right behind them at the time. And I identified myself for the first time up there. I'd just been redistricted in, and told them about my law enforcement background, what had happened down there with the tables, knocking them into people. And they hadn't seen it. They were behind that big old gay pride flag. Well, they immediately, their eyes lit up. It's like, yes, they went down and they put those two in handcuffs. The three that I knew were looking to respond if it got physical, they left. What my point in all this is, when you stand against Satan and the people are doing his bidding, and you stand in truth, and you also stand in love, because Will Thomas and others, they need help, and they need help in love. But if you stand against the people that are actively trying to destroy the foundations of reality, and you had mentioned something about you had to snap back into the reality in the locker room. Well, that really truly wasn't reality. I mean, it was reality in the sense that you're being forced to accept this stuff, but you were being coerced into something that really had no basis in truth in life. Uh, what are some of the things that you would say to young people? Well, first, let's start with just dealing with the transgender issue in sports and in other areas in life with the young people that you've been working with. What would be a bit of advice that you'd give with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing I hear from people and even my own teammates is that people are afraid of losing friends or having consequences. And I think especially as girls, that's something I really struggled with. I mean, when I on my team was going through this during the season, I have just quite literally never been able to lie about anything. And so when people would ask me what I thought about it, I would say, yeah, I think this is really messed up that he's competing on our team. And people would be uncomfortable and they would be unhappy with me saying that out loud, even though they probably believed the same thing. And I think the biggest thing people, especially my age, deal with is just, again, being canceled, losing friends. And it's so much easier said than done. But my biggest takeaway from this entire experience is if someone you call a friend is not comfortable with you saying what you believe and talking about the truth and just sharing an opinion that might be different than theirs, they can't tolerate that. That was never your friend to begin with. And that took me a pretty long time to realize. And there was a lot of people that used to be part of my life back then. And I used to say, oh, well, maybe if I just be a little bit quieter, or if I don't talk about this as much, they'll want to be my friend again. And of course, they don't, because they don't value your opinions. They're not comfortable with tolerating other people's viewpoints. And so that's something I personally had to deal with, especially being early 20s. And so honestly, I can say several years removed from it, I've made a lot of friends and a lot of
Yeah.
friends who have different viewpoints from my own. But the thing that all my friends that I have and keep in my life right now is they're comfortable with me believing what I believe, and they're supportive of me doing what I know to be right. And I can say, yes, that it is so much worth it. It's so much better. And that is really the one piece of advice. So if anyone's going through this, yes, things might be uncomfortable to speak up. It might make you lose a friend, but you will be better off having done in your heart what you know to be right. And so that's really, I would say honestly, in this entire journey of doing this, that's probably the biggest lesson I've personally learned.
I think you probably had some experience with similar to mine. I've got a number of people who are gay or lesbian that are very uncomfortable with the whole transgender issue. They know that I hold to scriptural truth when it even regards their lifestyle, but you've got to be loving towards them. And when you were talking about having a respectful conversation, it's nice that I can have that with those folks. But it just seems that those who are actively pushing so hard for this, there's something else altogether. It's beyond just mere confusion. There's something more behind it.
Yeah, it's definitely this whole,
Spiritual.
yeah, there's definitely a spiritual aspect of this for sure. And I think I really do lean into my faith, and that is really why I've been able to be so outspoken. And I do continue to pray for those who are on the other side of this. I mean, I never do, wish ill upon anyone, whether they're calling me names or whether they're, you know, holding Riley hostage on university. I mean,
Why?
you name it. And so I think that's really what a lot of people will call us names, but it's, we're fighting for everyone, whether they're on our side or not. And I think that knowing that, I can sleep at night knowing that we are part of the right side of this and we are doing this for the right reasons.
Well, as we get ready to wrap up here, what are some of the things that you would like people to know, whether it's about you or about the work that needs to be done? Uh, I'm opening it up to you to just let folks know what you think that they need to know about that. What
Yeah,
we've been
yeah, I
discussing.
mean, I would I would say just in general, that this issue is not something that one person can fight alone. I think a lot of people that I hear from personally, privately, you name it, is that they're like, oh, well, I'm just one voice or my one experience is not enough. But this issue and most issues are built from a grassroots level. It's about the people who got involved in their local government. It's about the people who went to petition at the school that is putting litter boxes in the bathroom. Yes, that is actually something that's happening in this country.
Yes.
Um, Things like that. It is those people that I credit to the wins on this issue. It's not myself for going on the news and talking about it. It's not Riley. While we have had great progress to this and we've done a lot to help the issue, I'm not going to discount the work that we've all put in, but it's not up to people who are the most heard of name. It is really up to the grassroots people that share their stories, that bring it to their legislators, that are outside petitioning, that are getting signatures on things. I mean, I know a group of moms out in Denver were trying to get signatures for a girls' sports bill. It didn't end up passing and succeeding, but it's the people like that that move these things across the finish line. And so I know it's kind of a long drawn answer here, but
No, not at all.
my one final takeaway from this is that you're not too small. Every single voice makes a difference, and without those small voices at the individual level, at the grassroots level, at the small little tiny town in the middle of Pennsylvania or Ohio or wherever you might be in this country, it is because of you that we get this stuff done, not because of the people in Washington and the famous people and the big names. And so I hope that that helps encourage more people to speak out about this because again, without them, this would never have been possible. This wouldn't have come to President Trump's attention to sign this executive order, and we wouldn't be able to talk about the progress that we've made today. And so I hope that that's encouraging. And I don't know if you have more to add to that, but I also appreciate people like you who are state level legislators that are willing to have these conversations and bring awareness to them as well.
Well, I'll reiterate that up in Bradford, the Title IX ruling that President Biden tried to impose. I was invited up to talk to a school board meeting, and there were a group of moms up there that were very vocal, and I was happy to stand alongside them. Unfortunately, my district's bigger than the state of Connecticut. I'd actually been asked to speak at two other school board meetings, but my Senate schedule prevented me from being able to be there. But we were successful where I was able to show up, but we need more people to take that stand at the local level. Thankfully, President Trump has overturned President Biden's directive, and the schools no longer have to deal with that. And I'm hoping the ones that ended up deciding to go along with it will now reverse themselves. When you make a mistake, own up to it and make the change quickly and fight to make the change. I've had to do that a number of times. So, but also getting a national stage like you, like Riley and others, that helps give strength, and it also gives narrative to the folks who are in that fight locally. So I'm very grateful for what you and she and others are doing in this space, because you are providing ammunition for those people who are in the local school districts and fighting this at other levels. So I'm very grateful for you stepping out the way you did and being a voice. So it's been a pleasure having you on. I'm hoping that, like Riley, we had Riley also down at the Capitol, and I'd like to get a group of you all together and have a day for the legislature to really hear your stories and then bring in some fellow constituents from around Pennsylvania.
Absolutely. And like, again, I greatly appreciate you taking just time, care, attention to all of this. I know that I have confidence in Pennsylvania now that I know that people like you are there for fighting for the people, and truly for the best interests of the people in the state. And so I just want you to know that we appreciate you so much, and this fight would not be possible if it weren't for individuals like yourself. So thank you.
And you were just a big part of the team, a part of a
Exactly.
big team.
Exactly. Yeah, there's so many of us, and it's always great to connect with, again, so many great fighters on this issue and from so many different states and backgrounds, and you name it. And it's really been like the most valuable part, I would say, of this entire experience for myself. So,
Right. Well, thank you again. And for those who are watching and listening, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. The webpage is www.senatordush.com. Reminds me, Paula, how do people get a hold of you?
you could follow me on social media. I'm Paula Y Scanlan, on Instagram, on Twitter or X. My bad. Sorry, it's called X now.
Yeah,
And yeah, you can find me on there.
formerly known as X, is it?
Formerly known as Twitter, X.
Or Twitter, yes. All right. Well, thank you again, everybody, for watching the Mission Report. This is Chris Dush reminding everybody to stay vigilant and defend our Constitution. God bless.